With literally hundreds of new items added in the shadow of the Erdree, it can be really difficult to figure out and prioritize which ones to grab first. So to help you out, I picked a handful of my favorite new weapons, armors, talismans, and other items that I think are some of the best in the DLC that you should definitely be sure to pick up as early as possible. And these are all ones you can find pretty early without fighting any of the main story bosses, so this is a spoiler-free look. And kicking it off with one of my favorite new weapons, the Backhand Blade. Backhand blades are one of the new weapon types in the DLC, and there are a few different ones to choose from. But the Backhand Blade called the Backhand Blade is one of the first and easiest ones to get. The moveset on this weapon is just so quick, and when two-handed you can absolutely shred through enemies. I also really love the blind spot skill that it comes with. It's kind of this quick sidestep and launch forward, which is pretty reminiscent of the special move on the Bloodhound's Fang, which is one of my favorite special abilities in the entire game. There's some good iframes on it, and this sidestep itself is a great way to get out of the way in a hurry and then follow up with some quick damage. I don't really think I've seen enough people talking about how good this weapon really is, and I think that's probably just because it's something you get so early that it eventually gets overshadowed by some of the other new weapons, but this one is a really solid option to pick up early. Now, like I said, you can get this one pretty much straight away from outside a coffin just north of the Scorched Ruins. It should be sitting here nicely for you to pick up right next to the altar. And next up on the list is the Black Steel Greathammer. I'm typically not a fan of big heavy smash weapons, but I've been having a blast with this one. I'd say it's probably a close second to the Great Stars in terms of my favorite Greathammer. The amount of poise damage this thing does is insane. You can stagger enemies like crazy, especially with a good charged heavy attack. Now this one is a random drop from a Black Knight, so I don't exactly remember where it was where I picked this one up, but I don't remember ever having to farm for it, and I do remember getting it pretty early. But if you are looking to kill some Black Knights, there's a couple of good spots. There's a lone one right outside this Castle Ensis checkpoint site of Grace, which is pretty easy to take out by himself. And there's a handful more of them at this camp south of the Shadow Keep, which aren't too hard to take out either, and you can usually just take them on one-on-one. Now another thing that you're going to want to pick up early is the Deflecting Hardtear. This is a tier that you can add to your Flask of Wondrous Physic, which essentially gives you the ability to guard and counter. So rather than dodge rolling to take advantage of the iframes, you can more straight up fight enemies, learn their attacks, and guard against them. And when guarding with the Deflecting tier, you can really take a hit. I mean, this thing negates a ton of damage, and the effect lasts a full 5 minutes, which is more than enough time against most bosses. Now, I've seen this compared to making the game a lot more Sekiro-like, but I feel like that's a bit of a hard comparison to make. I mean, Sekiro was an absolute masterclass in guarding and parrying, but if you prefer this style of play or you're having trouble with the difficulty in the DLC, this is definitely a step in the right direction and something that can really help you out. And who knows, maybe in the future, or if we do eventually get a sequel to Elden Ring, they'll just make this part of the actual gameplay, because it really does add another level to the combat, which I really appreciate. Now, in order to get this tier, you'll have to kill the Furnace Golem that you encounter in the first area of the DLC, and unfortunately I don't really have any particular tricks for killing Furnace Golems. Personally, I find these fights to be a bit of a grind, but at least this first one is a lot more straightforward than some of the later game ones. I did find that having a big weapon and using Torrent to double jump over some of the attacks and stay in close definitely helps, and if you like using guard, then picking up this tier is definitely worth the effort. Next up is the Greatsword of Solitude and the Armor of Solitude. Now this is definitely one of the tankier armors in the game, so it's definitely not for everyone, but if it suits your build, it does provide some decent damage negation, and for a heavy armor, it's definitely one of the less bulky or bulgy ones. You know, in case you want to keep yourself protected, but also still show off a little bit of your figure. And the Greatsword of Solitude, which primarily scales with strength and dex, is a good balance between strength and versatility. In particular, I really like the special skill on it, the Moon Slash, which sends out this burst of air that deals some decent damage and gives you a nice ranged option. And one of the things that I don't see people talking about all that much is how much damage negation you get when holding down guard. I mean, this thing can really take a hit, so it's a good way to keep yourself protected without equipping a shield. And if you are interested in some other tips and tricks for damage negation, I made a video about it, which I'll be sure to link in the description below. And another interesting thing about this that I saw on Reddit, so shout out to that community, is that unlike other swords and weapons, this one doesn't have a shadow. Now this could just be a bug, or it could be a feature that the Sword of Solitude is so alone that it doesn't even have a shadow, but whether or not it's intentional, it's still a cool little detail. Now this is again one you can pick up pretty much straight away from the Western Nameless Mausoleum, which is just west of the Scorched Ruins. There is a minor boss in there, so I'm not going to spoil that fight, but once you defeat him, you'll get both the Greatsword and the Armor of Solitude. Now a good talisman that you're going to want to pick up early is the Dried Bouquet Talisman. This is one that boosts your attack power when your spirit summon dies. One of the things that I love about the DLC is that there are a lot more opportunities to use your spirit summons. So I've been experimenting with a handful of different ones, and while it's usually not ideal to have your spirit summons die, especially mid-boss fight, this at least helps give you a boost when it does happen. And it's really great for summons like the Night Maiden and Swordstress Puppet, or the Erdree Soldiers, because there are multiple spirits that can help you out. So when one dies, you get the boost, and you still have others to help you out. Now the attack boost doesn't stack, so if you have multiple spirits die, you're not getting an additional attack boost on top of that. But it does at least help keep the attack boost going, and sometimes every little bit helps, especially on those tougher boss fights. Now this is one that you can pick up from the Bellarat Tower Settlement. From the small private altar set of grace, head through the normal progression path, up the stairs and to the left. Follow the path along to this room and go up the ladder. Climb the stairs and then head to the left. Eventually you'll come up against broken walls that you can climb over. Head into this room where you'll fight through some pretty nasty bugs, but after that you'll get to this room where there's a Cross of Marika and a Scatter Tree fragment that you'll want to be sure to pick up. Head out and to the left and the dried Talisman Bouquet will be on this body here. Now another weapon that you'll want to be sure to pick up early is the Milady. This one is a light greatsword, but I feel like its moveset is more like a katana. It's super fast and just feels very fluid. I mean, when you use it, it's almost like you're dancing. There's these sort of delayed, slow movements followed by really quick strikes. It's really interesting and pretty fun to use. And its special ability is the Impaling Thrust, which is a really quick strike that you can use to close in distance. Now, I'm not sure if this is one that I'll be using to take on bosses anytime soon, but for just general exploration and plundering, this one is really fun to use. And it's also pretty easy to pick up. From the Castle Ensis site of Grace, you can run past the big troll and through the cave, and when you come to the opening, turn back around, kill the spear guy and the dog, and head up the ladder and to the top of the tower. Now the last one I want to talk about isn't an item per se, but rather a location. A location that I think has a huge concentration of some pretty amazing items in it, so it's definitely a place you're going to want to visit early. And that place is the ruined Forge of Starfall Past, which is located northwest of the Fort of Reprimand in Scatualtus. Now you can get there a couple of different ways. If you've already gotten past Castle Ensis, you can just head south from the High Road Cross site of Grace. But if you want to get there even earlier, there is a shortcut to get to Scatualtus without having to go through Castle Ensis, which I referenced in a previous video, so I'll be sure to link that in the description if you want to check it out. Now once you get to the ruined forge, head inside and pretty much immediately you can pick up the Smithscript Spear. Smithscript weapons are another one of the new weapon categories in the DLC that basically have the ability to act as a throwable without losing the weapon or costing FP. So if you're not a magic user, this really opens up the game in terms of ranged combat. And the Smithscript Spear is one of my favorite Smithscript weapons. It's super quick, and not only can you throw it by pressing your heavy attack, but you can also two-hand it for some additional power and throw it while on torrent, which makes it extremely useful. But if we continue on in the forge, we'll come up against a couple of these big stone guys. Their thing is you have to hit them in the weak spot in their back in order to really deal any damage, but if you want, they're also pretty slow, so you can mostly just run past them. Eventually, if we head up the ladder, we'll end up in this room, which is full of lava blobs that want to kill us, but if we run to the side into this room here, we can also pick up the smithing talisman. This talisman enhances weapon throwing attacks, which makes it really useful for Smithscript weapons. And oh yeah, this room is pretty much a trap, so be prepared to fight your way out or at least die trying. If we keep going in the forge, we'll come up against a lever that we can pull, which will lower a wall. Continue to follow that hallway past the rock monsters, and eventually you'll be able to pick up the Smithscript Cirque. This weapon is really interesting. It's another Smithscript weapon that almost acts like a boomerang. It has these kind of wide angle throws to it, but when two-handed, you get two of them, and it works almost just like a backhand blade. It's really quick, does some decent poise damage to stagger enemies, and also has the same skill as the backhand blade, the blind spot. So it's great for dodging out of the way and then following up with some quick damage. Now this is another one where I don't necessarily think I'll use it to challenge bosses anytime soon, but it's still a lot of fun to use just when out in the world. Now if we head back the way we came and we pull this lever, we can stand on the wall as it comes up and head through to this room. Examine the altar and you'll be rewarded with an ancient dragon smithing stone and the ancient meteoric or greatsword. Now as far as greatswords go, this one is probably a little underwhelming. It's got a nice wide swing so it can hit multiple enemies at once, but the damage output just really isn't all that great compared to other greatswords, and the special skill, which is just this lunge forward, seems a little underwhelming as well. It also requires 19 arcane, which I would have to respec if I wanted to use regularly, and it just doesn't seem worth it to me. But it's still worth picking up if you're already in the forge, and it comes with the ancient dragonsmithing stone, so that definitely makes it worth it all by itself. And that's my list of early DLC items that you definitely want to make sure to pick up as early as possible. But what are some of your favorite items? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. And if you found this video helpful, be sure to give it a like. As a small channel, every like really does help me out. And be sure to subscribe for even more Shadow of the Erdtree content. Thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.